In the Lord. If you would like to turn with us this morning, I'm going to be reading out of the book of St. Mark, the 5th chapter. St. Mark, the 5th chapter. A story that I have probably read many times and preached on a few times in my life about a woman who suffered a tremendous amount. And if I had a thought this morning, is that we're not broken enough. Not broken enough. You ever think about that? You ever think about what draws people for certain things, what draws people to the Lord? I mean, one of the things that I've noticed in my time as a pastor is that if you let somebody endure for a while, you let somebody endure a challenge or a hardship, it seems to draw people closer to the Lord. You let a little something go on. You let sickness happen. You let maybe a financial problem happen or a relationship problem happen. And it seems like it draws people to the Lord. But what amazes me is that we have to wait till we're broken to the point that things don't work, till we're broken to the point that we have no other place to turn before we turn to the Lord. I've always stood amazed at that fact. And it's not just once, it happens time and time again, that people will come to me and they'll say, pray for me. My family's all to pieces. My relationship's all to pieces. My health is all to pieces. My job is all to pieces. Pray for me. What amazes to me is that how few times that we actually look to the Lord before this happens. I wonder sometimes if we are broken enough. When we get truly broken is when we really start searching for the Lord, is it not? When things really go wrong, we find comfort in knowing that Jesus is near. We read about this woman here, starting in the 25th verse, that had an issue of blood. Now, a little backdrop on this what this would really mean in the Jewish tradition. Okay, we look at this woman had a problem. She had an issue to where that she was in a constant state of being unclean. According to the Jewish tradition, a woman that had blood on her or any person that had blood on her was unclean. They had certain rituals they had to perform. If you touched a person like this, then you would have to be considered unclean till sundown. Then you'd have to wash. You'd have to do some certain things. Any eating utensils, plates, forks, knives that she may have used will be considered unclean. To be around her would have been taboo. You couldn't have been around her and had any kind of physical contact with her whatsoever, because if you did, you would be unclean, which in that tradition was held to the lowest of regard. So you can imagine what this woman suffered. 12 years worth of this. Now, according to natural biological clocks, this woman probably suffered for 12 years. She may have suffered for this from anywhere from a third to half of her adult life. She might have been ritually unclean. So this woman had spent 12 years without the caring touch of a loved one, without being able to have a hug or just a hand on her shoulder to tell her how much that they loved her. This woman would have been considered unclean, okay? To do so would have caused you to be unclean, and not many people wanted to go through that ridicule or that separation. This woman would have been pretty much separated and isolated for 12 years. Now, can you imagine today in your life if you were not allowed to have any kind of fellowship for 12 years? It's something that we as humans, we crave most of the time fellowship with those around us. Whether we like to admit it or not, even those that profess to be loners or like to be left alone, after a certain amount of time, they crave just a little bit of human attention. They want just a little bit, if not a lot, of fellowship with someone. Can you imagine what it must have been like for this woman? 12 years worth. 12 years worth of isolation. Not only 12 years worth of isolation, the Bible tells us in the story, as we're going to read, that as she went forward, she tried to get healed of this problem. For 12 years, it says that she suffered many things of many physicians, but the condition only grew worse. Can you imagine the desperation and the level of treatment that it must have been? Now, we're not talking about going over here to, some really nice surgical center over here, or some really nice up-to-date doctor that they have the most of modern medicine. Modern medicine at that time could be pretty rudimentary at best. Potions and concoctions that they would have made up to probably give her were probably made a billy goat sick. but yet they chose, that would have been the way that medicine was practiced then. Some of the things they could have done would have probably been not only physically painful from the inside, but physically painful for the outside, emotionally traumatizing. And this woman, not only did she not get any better, she got worse. So she had reached a level of desperation. She didn't know what else to do. And she was looking for an answer. She had heard of this man called Jesus. Starting in the 25th verse of the 5th chapter of St. Mark. It says that a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years and had suffered many things of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was nothing bettered but rather grew worse. When she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment, for she said, if I may but touch his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? He looked around about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. Pretty important story here, that as we read this story of this woman, it says that she had suffered to the point to where she was desperate. Now, can you imagine what it would have been like? This woman who was ceremoniously unclean, she was considered unclean. If she was out in the crowd, that meant that everybody that she touched, if she came in here and everybody was thronging to see Jesus, that every one of you that come in contact with her would have been considered unclean. You would have been considered nasty. You would have been considered unrighteous at that point. Can you imagine today what it must have been like for this woman to be to a point of desperation that she was going to subject herself to being an outcast and being ridiculed and being put away from everyone, possibly even stoned for her blatant disregard of the ceremonial cleansing. She could have been stoned for this. Can you imagine what it must have been like for her to reach the level of desperation that she was broken to the point that nothing else mattered in her life other than getting to Jesus Christ? I wonder today if anybody here has reached a point where they're to the point where you're so broken in life. Now, I don't know why God has chose to use these messages. It seems like that every week, and I tell you this, that every week it seems like it's the same message over and over and over again. And I can't help but wonder why God is trying to send this message out to his church. When I wonder if there's people in here that do so well at hiding the fact that they're broken, only to know on the inside that they have reached this level of desperation. You see, this woman wouldn't have went out and advertised that she was unclean. She would have tried to hide that fact as she got in amongst the crowd. She wouldn't have went out with a sign and said, hey, stay away from me. I'm ceremoniously unclean. Get away from me. I'm an outcast. I need to be isolated. She would have probably hid that fact very well. She would have probably put on her clothes, and she would have probably went out like she was okay just to be able to get through the crowd without much attention being drawn to her, to be able to get to Jesus. And I wonder, sometimes, is that the way that people at church do? Even though on the inside we're tore up and we're broken up and we're ceremoniously unclean in front of Jesus Christ with the unrighteousness that lives in our life. But yet, on the outside, we look like we fit. We look the part. I'm sure as you scan the crowd, I'm sure that there was a lot of people there that looked like they belonged, and she would have looked just like them. If I were to look out over the crowd this morning, I can't look at any particular person and say, hey, yeah, I know exactly who this message is going to. It would probably scare me to death if I did. Matter of fact, it probably wouldn't work, because I'd probably clue in on somebody, and knowing me, I'd be like, hey, you! This message is for you. The rest of y'all can leave. I'm just going to preach to you. You see, that's not the way that God works. I don't know where the message is going today. Maybe it's for more than one person, but I think that there is a time that we've gotten so good at putting our cloak on and putting our disguise on to where nobody can see how broken we truly are. Maybe even to ourselves, when we look in the mirror, we have disguised ourselves in the mirror to the point to where when we look in the mirror, oh, everything is okay and I'm all right. At least we might tell ourselves, it's not maybe I'm not all right, but at least I'm no worse than somebody else. Does anybody here ever been guilty of that? Looking in the mirror and knowing that maybe there's a need in your heart, knowing that maybe there's things not right in your life, but you measure against everybody else and you say, well, I know there's some problems in my life, but at least I'm no worse than they are. I know what they do. I know how they live. I know what they say. They claim to be a Christian, and I'm no worse than they are. I can tell you from experience, I've done that in my own life. There's been times in my life that I've looked at people that profess to be these super Christian type people, and I would excuse my bad behavior by looking at them, because I would say, hey, if they can live that way, claiming to be a super Christian, then I can live the way I am and be just as good. I don't have to worry about anything. Measuring my brokenness against their brokenness. That's like kind of trading tore up cars, is it not? My car has flat tires and a busted windshield. Your car has a motor that's bad. Let's trade. Neither one of them's going to go anywhere. Neither one of them's drivable, but that's okay. I'm going to trade mine for yours. Oftentimes, that's what we do in our life is we look at someone else's brokenness and we say, you know what? My brokenness is no worse than their brokenness. We're just going to all be broke. You know, it's time that we as God's people realize that you don't have to live a broke life. This woman here, she had reached a desperation point to where she said, you know what? I don't care what everybody else does. I don't care what everybody else thinks. I don't care what happens to me. I have got to get some relief from what I'm going through. Maybe you're here and you've reached that tipping point in your life where you have reached the point to where you say, you know what? I don't care anymore. I don't care what everybody else thinks. I don't care what everybody else says. I don't care how everybody else lives. I'm not measuring my brokenness against their brokenness. I'm not measuring my success against their success. My Christian life is not measured by someone else's Christian life. My Christian life is measured by touching Jesus Christ. And that's what she did. It said that there was a great multitude that passed by him. They said there was, and I picture it kind of like, you know, you see these images on TV of these movie stars that come out, and it says, you know, how the paparazzi, they follow around them, and they get all around them, and they're amassed, and people are trying to push them back so they can make their way through the crowd. That's what I picture as Jesus is walking through. It says here that he had healed so many, he had done so many things that his popularity had grew. And he was on his way down to Jairus' house, one of the leaders of the synagogue, and everybody was going around to be able to see what he was about to do at Jairus' house. It's like, oh, I've heard about him healing. I want to see this little girl's about to die over here, so he's headed down there, and we're going to go down and see what's going on. And all these people were around him, and I could picture the disciples going, get out of the way, you know, kind of like bodyguards, move out of the way, make way for Jesus, you know, and they're pushing everybody back. And out of the middle of this crowd, here comes this woman that was unclean, making everybody else around her unclean. And says, as she made her way, her face said this, she said, if I could just get close enough to touch the hem of his garment, just to touch. I don't have to touch him. I don't have to grab him by the hand. I don't have to get a hug. All I got to do is get close enough to him just to touch him, and it'll be okay. It says that as she pushed her way through the crowd, I can just picture this, as the crowd was gathered around and she was trying to make her way, she was probably having to fight and push, and she was probably shoving people out of the way. And maybe as Jesus passed by, I could see her making this last-ditch attempt to jump out and maybe dive out just to touch his garment before he passed by and was out of reach. And it says that she touched the hem of his garment. And immediately, she was made whole. What amazed me about this story was that just by touching the hem of his garment, it said that she didn't have to have a full-on conversation with Jesus. She just had to get close to him. I wonder today if maybe you're expecting some supernatural event to define your spiritual life. Maybe you're expecting that when you get close to Jesus, there's going to be thunder rolling, and there's going to be lightning flashing, and there's going to be earthquakes, and there's going to be tornadoes, and all this stuff is going to happen when you get close to Jesus. The closer you get, the more it's going to happen, right? I mean, everybody in here that ever knows the touch of Jesus Christ probably experienced that, right? I mean, you had thunder rolling and lightning flashing and earthquakes happen. Probably not. It's probably quite the opposite effect. It's probably that nobody besides you knew what was going on. You see, the rest of that crowd, nobody knew what had just happened. The disciples didn't know what happened. The crowd didn't know what happened. There was two people who knew what happened, the woman and Jesus. Today, if you're expecting everybody else to have a reaction to your spiritual touch with Jesus, probably it's not going to happen. But you will know. When you get close to Jesus, you will know that you have been close to Him, that you have touched Him, and more importantly, that His touch has left you whole. When Jesus turned around, He looked around and He said, "Hey, who touched me?" He was looking at a crowd of faces, and I believe He wasn't questioning because He didn't know. He wasn't looking around and saying, "Hey, I could look at this crowd here today and say, oh, I don't know which one of y'all touched Jesus." I could, but Jesus will look around and say, "I know exactly which one of y'all come looking for me. I know exactly which one of you reached out to me." You see, what happened here was He was giving her an opportunity to confess. He was giving her an opportunity to proclaim what He had done for her. Now, I don't know what would have happened. The Bible is not clear on what would have happened if she would have just eased back into the crowd and went away. The Bible doesn't say that all of a sudden that her issue would have came back and she wouldn't have been healed. It doesn't say that she would have dropped dead. It didn't say that, that a whirlwind would have swept her up or the earth would have opened up and swallowed her whole. It doesn't say that. But this is one thing that I am persuaded to believe, that when you have truly had the touch of Jesus Christ in your life, you can't help but let it out. This woman, as she was there, and now the cat was out of the bag. Somebody had touched Jesus. Jesus had turned around. He said, "Oh, who touched me?" And she stepped forward. She said, "It was me. It was me. I touched you. I'm the one that needed your healing hand. I'm the one that was so broken. I was broken enough to where I came and I let everything else go so that I could have your healing touch. Everything else didn't matter anymore. What the people sat behind you or in front of you in the pew, what they think about you doesn't matter anymore. What your family's going to say about you doesn't matter anymore. What your friends and your cohorts are going to say about you does not matter anymore. Because at this point in time, your brokenness has propelled you into action, and now you have reached out to Jesus. And at that point, when your faith met Jesus' touch, something miraculous happened. When what you are broken from met Jesus' touch, all of a sudden, all the other things really didn't matter anymore. This woman stepped out and she said, "It is me. I'm the one that's broken. I'm the one that's got a problem. I'm the one who was just made whole." Jesus looked at her, and I'm sure maybe she expected to be chastised for her actions. Maybe she thought, this guy, this teacher, this rabbi, this man that has expounded the scriptures, maybe this guy's going to turn around and he's going to let me have it out of the Levitical books. But he's going to just absolutely just blast me for what I've done. Maybe she even had a little fear of being rejected for what she had done. Rather than being rejected, quite the opposite happened. Jesus looked at her and He said, "Daughter," He said, "thy faith has made thee whole. It's okay. It's okay. You're not so dirty or unclean that you can't come to me. You're not so broken that I can't fix it. You're not so tore up that I can't mend it." So I don't know why God sends these messages, but He knows why He sends these messages. Maybe you're here this morning and maybe your life is to the point to where it's that broken. Maybe you're to that point to where you've hit it so well on the outside that you know nobody else in here knows. I don't know. Nobody else sitting beside of you knows. But you know. You know who the Lord is speaking to. You know this moment is because you see, you think about the intersection of this woman's life and Jesus. All the things that had to fall into place for Him to be on that path at that time, for her to be propelled into that path at that time, for everything to happen at that time. So when her faith and Jesus' touch intersected, they'd be right on time. You see, here's the great thing. Maybe you're here today, and maybe your faith and your need is intersected when Jesus is touched this morning. Maybe you say, "I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why I chose this day to be here at this time. But you know what? Jesus knows. And more importantly is, you might be sitting here saying, you know what, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that if I come, I'm going to be rejected. I'm afraid that once I tell Jesus about all that I've done, where I've lived, what I've been through, and what I've said, thought, or what's happened to me, that he's not going to want a part of me. When quite the opposite is true. When you allow your faith to reach out and touch Jesus Christ, he says, not only come, but he says, guess what? I can fix your brokenness. I can fix your hurt. I can mend what's tore up. But you got to let me have it. You've got to come to me. Can you imagine what, and here's the thing that the Bible's not clear on, but I would really like to know. And one day I guess I will. Can you imagine what this woman's reaction was when she turned around? And I've never really thought about it until now. But can you imagine what it must have been like after 12 years of isolation? 12 years of uncleanliness. Can you imagine what it must have been like for that not to be the case anymore? Can you imagine what it must have been like when she turned around? That now she can go hug her parents or her spouse or her children or her family or her friends. And there will be nothing wrong with it. All of a sudden she can fellowship with those around her with freedom, not having that burden hanging around her neck anymore. Can you imagine what it must have felt like for that to be gone away? Just by the simple touch of Jesus Christ. Would you like to know? Would you like to know? How about trying it on this morning? How about trying it on? How about if you're here this morning and things are not right in your heart? If you're here this morning and things are apart, if you're here this morning and you're feeling broken, maybe you say, well, Brother Randy, I'm not to that point yet. Well, you will be. You will be. You see, that woman, she wasn't that broken for 12 years. For 12 years, she thought, I could find an answer for my problem. For 12 years, I can, surely to goodness, somebody else has an answer to this. Until the day she realized that there was no other answer other than Jesus Christ. Here's the thing about it is, now, in my life, I can tell you a little bit about Randy, okay? In my life, there's been things that I have watered with the Lord. I have had my Jacob moments. I've had my times of wrestling with God's will in my life. I've had times of straining at the bit, thinking I can endure this. I can outlive it. I can outlast it. And the thing that I found about it is when I try that, I just keep making things worse and worse and worse and worse. I keep feeling worse and weaker and more tired and more strained, only to go back and repeat the cycle again and get worse and worse until you finally get to the point to where you're broken enough to where you say, I give up. I give up. Lord, it's all yours. God, I can't do anything else with this. I am done wrestling with this. I am done feeling this way. God, I don't care what happens next. It's in your hands. I'm putting it all on you. And it's amazing the relief that comes by. I've told you all the story about me announcing my calling to preach before. And I never will forget that day when I came up and I told my pastor, Brother Charles Harness, I said, Charles, I got to announce my calling to preach. And for so long I had waited for people to give me some kind of sign, some kind of push, some kind of nudge. Never happened. Never happened. Only to afterwards when I announced my calling to preach and people knew about it, they were like, man, I've been waiting for this for a long time. I figured this was going to happen. I was like, where was you at 3 weeks ago? You see, it wasn't them to tell me how broken it was. It was me to know how broken I was. I didn't need somebody else to describe it for me. I needed to come to that realization myself. And maybe, just maybe this morning, you have come to that realization. I'm going to ask them if they will come and get a song. I don't know what is in your life this morning, okay? Sometimes I guess I choose to be blissfully ignorant of people's personal lives. Those of you who know me know I try not to get involved in people's personal lives a whole lot because, to be honest with you, I don't want what's going on in your life to hinder what I preach out of a pulpit. I want to be able to stand and preach to you without fear of knowing what's going on. But here's the great thing is, by doing that, I can allow the Lord to speak to you. His word, as he comes through and he delivers his word, and I just get to be a messenger of it, I know that it is for somebody, because the Bible promises me that his word will not return void, that it will accomplish where it is sent. So this I know this morning, that it has been sent. And it will accomplish its work, whether it be today, whether it be tomorrow, whether it be the next time we meet. It will accomplish its word. But just like this woman struggled each and every day, she finally put an end to her struggling by just admitting that she was broken and she needed something. Maybe today you would like to put an end to your struggling and just say, Jesus, I need your touch. It doesn't matter what everybody else says. I need your touch. As we stand and as we sing this morning, I'd like to invite you, if you feel like you need to come to the altar,